Welcome to A Cup of Gratitude with Amanda Schaefer. Hi, I'm your host, and I'm so glad you stopped by. This podcast is really for anyone, anywhere, anytime. And it's about taking a moment to slow down and look around and actually see all of the good things that are there. There's no question that asks, is your cup half empty or half full? But I think a better question is, what's in your cup? I mean, a drop of gratitude will benefit your life unimaginably more than a full cup of anything else. So let's settle in and take a look at how we can shift our focus and embrace the joy and the wonder of the life that we have. And once you start, you won't be able to stop seeing the good. And just like me, you won't be able to stop talking about it. And somehow that creates even more. Even in the midst of difficulty, even when it's really hard, learn how to drink from a cup of gratitude. Welcome. Today we have with us Jonathan Bittner. Jonathan is a grad student. He's a social media influencer and a combat veteran. He enjoys helping others and talking about life. Welcome, Jonathan. Thanks for joining us.
Hello, I'm happy to be here.
Well, I'm glad that you are willing to tell your story. I think a lot of people can benefit from some of the things you've been through.
Yeah, I really hope so. And I think it's a story that even if you don't have the same exact experiences, I think there's a lot that you can relate with my story.
Absolutely. So let's start with, tell me about going into the Army. What were your expectations? What were the realities?
I didn't really have any expectations or any really thoughts about it. My family has a long history of veterans. So it's always been a normal part of my family. My father was in the military. My uncles were in the military. I have cousins, great uncles. My great grandfather was in the military. Mostly just the Marines and the Army. And so joining the Army wasn't really something I had expectations for. I would say I had no plans to go to college, and so the military was the next best thing. It's something I wanted to do ever since I was little, just partly because my dad was in the military. So,
when you got there, how old were you when you went in?
well, I enlisted when I was 18. So on my 18th birthday, I went down to MEPS, which is the military entrance processing station. I believe it's what it stands for. The military uses a lot of acronyms, and the longer I've been out, the more I forget what it stands for. So it's my 18th birthday. Went down to Fort Dix, New Jersey, and went through the whole medical testing and everything else, and enlisted right on my birthday.
Wow, that is a young age.
It is. Majority of those who serve this country begin when they're 18, right out of high school. There are some 17-year-olds too.
Wow. I mean, I think back to when I was, well, I can barely remember back that far, but back to when I was that age, and the thought of defending my country and all that might entail is just very awesome. I can't imagine it, really. And my son, I can't imagine him doing that at that age. When you got there, what were some of the realities, maybe things that you hadn't expected that were part of your everyday life?
To be honest, there wasn't much that I didn't expect. I really went into this knowing what was going to happen, what I was going to do. One thing I made sure of was that when I enlisted in 2005. The wars in Iraq and Afghanistan had been going on for several years. So for me, it wasn't a shock that I was enlisting during a time of war, where those who enlisted maybe in 1999, early 2000, into 2001, when they enlisted, they didn't know they were going to be continuously at war for most of their enlistment time. So for me, I was well aware that I was enlisting during a time of war, that boot camp, we're going to get yelled at. It's difficult. So the boot camp is really a culture shock for a lot of people, because it's how they strip away your own personal identity, and then they kind of build you back up to be a soldier who they want you to be. So I was well aware of that process. I'd watched videos all throughout my childhood of what boot camp would be like. Um, so I expected everything that was going to happen.
Well, when we were discussing it, you had told me that you were assigned to the chaplain.
Yeah.
So, how did that make your experience different than maybe some of the other soldiers?
So it's different for me. I had a role pretty much as a bodyguard for the chaplain. So just a little bit of history with that. It's against the Geneva Convention, which is the rules of war, which every modern day country follows or is supposed to follow during a time of war. Our enemies, they don't follow that at all. But since we hold ourselves to a higher standard, we follow. So, with chaplains are considered non-combatants, which means they are part of the military, but they're not. They're supposed to be kept safe.
Right.
Usually, if both sides of the war follow the Geneva Convention, would be a little bit different. Other people who kind of fall under those lines are like civilian Red Cross people. Civilians are really considered non-combatants too. So the chaplains can't protect themselves. They're not allowed to pick up any weapons, and so that's what my job was for. And so that differs from other people because I'm assigned to the chaplain. I travel with him, especially overseas in a combat zone. In Afghanistan, I was there in 2007 and 2008. And during that deployment, we had about, I forget, it was either 15 or 18 bases
Wow.
that our soldiers were at from my unit. So I traveled with him around the country, just protecting him, whether we were on convoys, we were flying by helicopter, whatever means of transportation, I was there making sure that he was safe.
Wow. And in addition to keeping him safe, you must have encountered so much more suffering and seeing people dying because he was going to give last rites. He was traveling to places where people were wounded, where people were dying. How did that affect you?
Um, it was very challenging, and again, it's a very helpless or hopeless feeling. I would say like maybe a combination of both of those. And again, that's something that people don't really think about. They look at a chaplain and say, oh, they're like a religious leader,
Right.
which is true to some extent. Chaplains really work with the higher parts of the command. And so whenever there is that loss or there's soldiers who are wounded, the chaplain is there giving last rites or praying with those soldiers, and I'm there with him. So it's definitely different. When I was deployed, I was 20 years old, and this was really, I had lost my grandfather at an early age.
Mm-hmm.
My uncle had passed away. I believe one of my aunts had passed away by that time. So death wasn't something that was new to me, but it was different experiencing it firsthand.
Absolutely. I, again, can only imagine what that was like. And did you get to be part of some of the ceremonies that they had for fallen soldiers?
So I did. So they call those ramp ceremonies, and those are held uh, in Afghanistan. There's a big air base called Bagram Air Base, and so every time we lost soldiers from my specific unit that I was assigned to, we would have what they call a ramp ceremony. It's actually a very beautiful ceremony, very sad, very solemn at the same time, where you have soldiers lined up and leads to the back of an aircraft. And the gate of the aircraft or the back of the aircraft is down the ramp, so you can walk up there. There's bagpipes playing, and
Wow.
really carry what they call I believe they call it a carrying case, not a casket.
Okay.
What the remains are put into. It's very similar to caskets, but you would carry it like you would see maybe in the movies or on the news when a soldier is killed at a
Right.
funeral. So that you are lined up on that carrying case or maybe it's called a transfer case. I think it goes by either one. So it's a ceremony. You're carrying that up onto the airplane. You put it down. Sometimes, if there's more than one casualty, there will be several of these up there, and the chaplain's up there, giving either the last prayer or the last rites if they're Catholic.
Yeah. I mean, that had to have affected you over time, just seeing so many different young men passing away and being part of that ceremony. Now, I also understand that you had a traumatic brain injury
Yes.
from serving, and that you came back as a retired Army because you also came back with PTSD.
So there was a process with that. So,
uh-huh.
My enlistment, I still had several years left on my enlistment. And when I did come home, the PTSD, I believe, really started when I was overseas, just with all the trauma
Mm-hmm.
I had experienced. And so my chain of command, people who ranked higher than me, saw that I was having issues, and they were really concerned, and that is what started the process for my medical retirement.
Right. Well, that's wonderful that they do look out, because for you to continue serving when you needed to do some healing of your own wouldn't have probably been very safe for you.
Yes.
Now, when you did return, you came back, you had traumatic brain injury, you had PTSD, and did you try different things to try to get back to what you felt like, who you were before you left? And if so, what did you try?
My biggest thing was I didn't really realize to the extent that I had changed.
Yeah.
And I think that really played a big part into, what I did to try to get back to have some sense of normalcy, I would say. Um, so it wasn't until, some friends that I had kind of started mentioning, you're different,
Right.
just different relationships that I was in at the time came to an end because of how I was. I still didn't really realize to the extent of how much I had changed. Just walking back into the world, it was kind of felt like I had never left in some ways, but the rest of the world around me had changed. So, really, being the year that I was deployed overseas, people back home had gone about their life, had accomplished different things, and here I was trying to start things from where I had left off. So to try to deal with the issues that were coming up, I did go to the VA for therapy. The VA was very important in my, I would say, recovery process. But other than that, I had started drinking pretty heavily, and the VA had prescribed benzos.
Right.
Benzos are short for benzodiazepines, which are anti-anxiety, anti-panic medications that is given out. They are very addictive. So I try to treat myself in some ways with substances to try to get back to some sort of normalcy again.
Yeah, that must have been a really lonely time.
It was. It's very lonely. I would say, being a combat veteran, it's very lonely most of the time. Your family's not going to understand what you went through. Your friends aren't going to understand what you went through.
That's right.
They actually experience combat themselves or going to war themselves. There still is some differences. If you were just a regular veteran, the whole military culture as a whole is different than the civilian world, which is everybody else outside the military. So there is a lot of adjustment issues
Right.
that a lot of the veterans go through, just because they don't feel like there's people out there who can relate to them, and that which causes that loneliness and isolation.
So I know at one point you now have a retired therapy dog. Her name's Annie. And could you tell us a little bit about how you got her, what she means to you, how she changed some of that?
Certainly. So Annie is a retired service dog.
Okay.
I wanted to bring this up on here for a lot of the listeners because I do hear those terms used interchangeably a lot. So a service dog is trained for a specific individual who has disabilities. Therapy dog is, a dog that's trained to help many different people out. And so Annie was a service dog. She um, has a very special place in my heart. So I found out I had gotten her from an organization called Puppies Behind Bars. Puppies Behind Bars is located in New York, and their dogs are raised and trained in prisons to help veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan who have been diagnosed with PTSD and traumatic brain injuries. So, a wonderful, wonderful organization saving the lives of hundreds, if not thousands, of veterans by now over the years. So, I found out about this organization. They're very selective of who they give their dogs to. And it was 2013. I went up to New York to a prison. Again, like I said, all these dogs are raised in prisons from the time, I guess, they're about 8 weeks old to 2 to 2.5 years old. They spend in training, and then they give about, my class, there's about 6 or 7, I think there's actually 5 veterans in my class who all received dogs during that cycle. And so we trained with the prisoners up in the prison who had raised these dogs. As to learn the commands, the dogs are taught 90 different commands.
Wow, that's amazing.
It is very amazing what they're able to do with these dogs. These dogs are some of the best, and it's definitely not a cheap undertaking for Puppies Behind Bars. And one of the amazing things with the organization is for the 2 weeks that they send us up to New York, they paid for our hotels, they paid for our transportation to New York, they paid for most of our food, and they paid for dogs.
That is such an amazing thing. Wow. I am so glad to hear that something out there is like that is out there.
It is amazing. And one of the things, I guess the biggest thing, if I had to choose one thing that Annie was able to do for me was to help me learn to love again. She had this way to get into my heart, soften my heart up, and she is, my girl.
Oh, that is wonderful. Well, animals are the best. I'm a total dog lover myself. Well, you're a Christian. So I hadn't asked you yet, but what role did your faith play in all of this journey you've been through? Did it help you hold on to hope? How does it help you now?
To be honest, I don't think I really at the time I really put much thought into my faith at that time. It was just something, just going through that period of time. I didn't want to use my faith as a crutch, I would say, or as an excuse of not to do things to help get better. But I think in some ways that it did maybe give me more meaning to my life than other people.
Mm-hmm.
It's like there is a purpose why I'm here on earth, whether I understand it at the time or not.
Right.
There is some purpose, and it's not all the time that we do understand what that purpose is. So I think looking back at that time, whether I was aware of it or not, I really feel like now looking back that it really helped me to understand that there was a reason why I was still here on earth, why I was going through what I was going through, even if it was recognizable or not. So I think that's what my faith back then was able to do. And now it just kind of has evolved, I guess, over the years.
Mm-hmm.
Or it's like now that I am seeing, well, here's why I went through what I did.
That's right.
And then here's how I can help other people. And I think that's part of Christianity that maybe people kind of lose track of. It's, a lot of people think being a Christian is going to church, and, part of it. Being around other people, maybe preaching at people or talking out at people about your religious beliefs. But I think, really as a Christian, what we're supposed to do is to be there to help people and not to expect something back.
That's right. We're meant to show the love of God to others. Absolutely.
And so it's like here in my life now, I've had a better understanding where you don't always have to, be preachy while you're doing things.
That's right. I wish all Christians knew that, because sometimes there are people that are put off, that will never go to church, that have been over churched or had a bad experience,
Mm.
that really they just need that love and that relationship and that consistency to help them be introduced to who God is.
And I think there's, the difference. It's just, to love people like Christ loved us. He didn't really expect anything in return.
That's right.
At the times, just said, "Hey, believe in me," and he helped so many people. And I think that's something that a lot of Christians, I would say, struggle with. It's, there's always a catch to why you're doing something to help somebody, and it's definitely not the approach that Jesus took. And here I am going through what I've gone through and having a better understanding of what sacrifice is.
Yeah.
That's real big in Christianity, and having a better understanding how to love people in your life and to be selfless
Yeah.
and, lay down, your life in not just your physical life, but, to lay down things that are important to you to help other people.
Yeah. Well, speaking of laying down your physical life, I do want to stop and thank you for your service.
You're welcome.
I enjoy freedoms because of things that people like you, wonderful people like you, have done, that I'll never really be able to appreciate.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I do know that you have done lots of serving. Could you tell us a little bit? You have been involved in serving your veterans in some extremely important ways. And you're getting your master's degree right now in psychology. Now, tell me about that part of your life. What are some things you've done? VFW, you served. You've helped with some other nonprofits.
Yes. So I'm gonna try to see if I can remember everything. So I am in school, as you stated. I am working on my master's in clinical and counseling psychology with a trauma focus.
Mm-hmm.
So I will be graduating in July with my master's degree. I have a couple interviews coming up with some doctoral programs, which I am excited about to kind of
Congratulations. That's exciting.
further my education and training to help veterans. So that's really a really goal of mine, is to serve the veteran community. So not only am I in school, I also help out a nonprofit called Operation Ward 57. I help with their crisis hotline. Veterans or their family members and even first responders now can call in when they're really in a crisis mode, whether they want to end their life or they're just not sure where to turn for resources.
Mm-hmm.
Call us on this hotline and we're able to help them. I also run a organization called Compeer Corps of Suburban Philadelphia. We run similar to the peer support model, where we set other veterans who are really struggling with other veterans who are further along in the recovery process, and they form almost a mentor relationship with each other, and they're there for support. So I run that organization for several counties. We are expanding with that. So that has been exciting. I've also been really involved in the Veterans of Foreign Wars, or the VFWs for short. Made it through my district's leadership, which is pretty much Montgomery County, all the way up to commander, which I ran the operations for the county. So I have been involved in a lot of different veterans organizations, nonprofits, and my life really revolves around giving back to veterans.
Absolutely. You want to talk about serving. Not only did you serve our country, but now you're serving your fellow veterans, and that's really admirable. And you are showing the love of Jesus in that way. That's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
So if you could tell your younger self just one little bit of advice, what would that be?
It's actually funny you bring this question up because it's something I've thought about over the past couple years. And I guess if I could just tell myself one thing, um, to a younger self, I would just say that everything's going to be okay.
Mm,
Just a lot of times, not just my story, but there's a lot of people who have suffered from trauma, uh, regardless of the type of trauma that, go through times of feeling, both hopeless and helpless. And one
yeah.
of the things that I would tell myself is if you wake up every day, with your heart's beating, you're breathing, there's still hope for tomorrow. And so that's something that I would tell myself, that there is always hope as long as I'm breathing and as long as my heart is beating.
Oh, that's wonderful. So I heard that you have become an influencer in the fragrance community.
Yes.
That it seems very different from the other things you've been talking about. How did that come about, and what role has the fragrance community and that journey played in your life?
So it's actually a very interesting story. I never really set out to be any kind of social media influencer. My specific social media that I'm on specifically is Instagram.
Mhm.
To be honest, I always thought Instagram was kind of stupid in some ways because it's just a bunch of pictures that people scroll through and like.
Right.
But fragrances, like perfumes, colognes, the broader term fragrances is something I've really been into for many years. Was also a way that I was really able to deal with the after effects of my trauma and going through PTSD. Your sense of smell is very closely linked to your brain.
Okay.
Memories are created from a lot of smells. And one thing that people can relate to is, you may smell something at the mall that takes you back to your grandmother or your mother cooking
Right.
in the kitchen from when you're younger. I always say perfume is the closest thing that we have in this world to time travel.
Wow. I love that.
Hey, it's very, very true just because of how our brain is and our senses. And so for me, it was something I collected fragrances for years, and really got into Instagram by accident. I'm not going to really get into that story now, but I started Instagram to, um, just to talk to a certain person for a very short time. And a
Mhm.
friend of mine really encouraged me to say, "Hey, why don't you start posting fragrance related stuff on Instagram?" So that it took off very surprisingly. I grew in a very short amount of time, and my account still grows to this day. It's just been fun having kind of a different world. A lot
Yeah.
of people enjoy smelling things, but a lot of people don't know that there is a fragrance community out there who are really big into perfumes or whatever fragrances that they like.
Well, that is fascinating. And I love how the fragrance and smells affect brain chemistry and that whole bit about, forming new, better, positive in the areas where you had some negative. That's amazing. Well, there's God right there,
Yeah.
you didn't just stumble into it. That's amazing. I love that.
And it wasn't something I had planned out. It just kind of fell into my lap, and that happens sometimes in life. Something falls into your lap, and you just have to run with it.
That's right. So, what advice could you give to families of veterans or other people who are struggling with PTSD?
Probably one of the biggest things of advice is don't pretend that you understand what they're going through. People who are really struggling with mental health, they don't really want to have somebody say, "Hey, I know what you're feeling. I know what you're going through," when in reality, they've never been in that place before.
Yeah.
So just be there, listen to them if they want to talk. Oftentimes, especially with combat veterans, they're not going to talk about their specific incidents that they went through. They're not going to talk about what war was like. what watching people die was like. But
Right.
if they do want to talk about that, listen. God created us with two ears and one mouth for a reason. Just listen and, be there for support. And don't feel like you have to fix everything for them because they can figure that out. With somebody like a mental health professional, or sometimes they can figure out themselves.
Right. That's very good advice. So, do you think having this difficult journey has strengthened you or given you more compassion?
It really has in some ways. People don't really look at mental health, I guess, through the lens that people who struggle with mental health do. I guess what I mean by that is a lot of times, you hear somebody struggling with depression. So your first thing that you want to say is, oh, just get over it.
Right.
Why can't you just be happy? That's something that is very detrimental for those people because, again, you're not being there to support them.
Mhm.
Mental health is a very big thing. It's very real. It's very scary at times for those who have mental health problems. It's one thing that I have grown to various stages of my own recovery process is looking back and being empathic towards those who are struggling. Uh,
Mhm.
it's hard sometimes, believe it or not, to kind of put yourself back in the shoes of maybe with somebody who's not as well off as I'm doing now. So
Right.
that's still a struggle. It's almost like I see how I was back then and I see myself now, and I forget the journey that took place in between the starting point and where I'm at now. So I always have to constantly remind myself that it's definitely not easy. It wasn't easy for me.
Yeah, and that's important for people who are just starting the journey to know that it might not happen in a day. It's not going to be, you don't just snap your fingers and everything, happens quickly, that it's a transformation and it takes time, but to know that there are people like you and there are nonprofits out there that are there to help, that they're the VA and doctors, and there are resources to
Yeah.
help them along the way.
Yeah, you're definitely not in it alone. There is a lot of resources out there.
Yeah.
VA has really gotten a bad rap over the years. Sometimes it's deserved, and most of the time it's not.
Yeah.
So don't hesitate to reach out to the VA because there's doctors there who are doing the best they can and want to help you.
Yeah. And a lot of people probably are afraid to reach out because they have heard things like that. So that's really important information. I appreciate you sharing that.
You're welcome.
Now, what do you think kept you from just giving up?
That's a very good question. And I think that's where, my faith comes into play. It's just, again, I woke up every day knowing that there had to be a purpose, that I was still here. And then that God wouldn't have just let me go through that without any kind of reason.
Right.
And so there had to be a purpose. And I understood that um, to some degree. And I think that's why I kept going because, again, early on, I realized if I could wake up every day, there was still a chance that things would get better.
Yeah. Do you have particular plans for the future? Do you have like a dream or a goal that you're working towards?
That changes. Just where depending on where I'm at in life, a goal really that I have right now is to get into a doctoral psychology program and spend the next 5 6 years in that and graduate. I do want to get a private practice off the ground like my wife. My wife's a therapist, a licensed therapist here in Pennsylvania. So I want to have a private practice where I can work with veterans, where I can work with anybody who's struggling with mental health. But beyond that, one thing I've learned is not to plan too far ahead because things constantly change.
This is true. Just look at the year 2020. So you said that your wife is a therapist, and with some of my guests that I know, and I'm trying to have guests on that are everyday people with extraordinary stories. I don't typically share until the end how I know them, but your wife is my daughter, so you are my son-in-law, and I've got to tell you, for me, uh, how amazing it's been just watching God put the two of you together, watching that bigger plan, watching as she waited for the person God had for her, and just to see what he has for you guys as a team, as a couple. There's a calling for both of you together as well as separately, and it's an amazing thing. I'm so grateful to have seen all of that and to be able to know who you are and that that's who is caring for my daughter.
It's definitely, like I said, don't plan too far ahead because sometimes things happen very quickly. And, that's a very prime example and reason. I wasn't, at the time, it's like I didn't expect her to be the one when we met, and it just blossomed into where we are now. And now I have another great family. And so
Yeah.
it's an amazing, amazing story, an amazing journey that, again, I didn't expect to happen as soon as it did.
Well, that's another prime reason for holding on because, like you said, we can't tell what's coming that much further after today, but God has a plan where He sees the entire story.
Yes.
As a podcast host, I want to thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. It's so important. Thank you for being willing to share and for talking about resources and being honest about your journey. But also, as your mother-in-law, I want to thank you again. Just, I'm so proud of you and so grateful for God bringing you into our family.
Thank you, Mom. I really love you, and I love my second part of the new family that I have.
I love you too. It's great to have another son. All right, thanks so much for joining us. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Hey, so I just want to thank you so much for spending your time with me. And I want to challenge you to go out today and to just take notice and to stop and really look around and find at least one good thing, one thing to be thankful for. If you do that today, you're going to find so many more things tomorrow without even trying. Because once you start, you begin to see what's always been there. And if you need a refill, you can come join me again for another cup. Make sure to subscribe and have an awesome day and go be grateful.